It was supposed to be a quiet weekend getaway. My husband Jake and I had been married for 18 years, and things had started to feel stale. Not broken, just tired. So we decided to escape to the mountains, just the two of us. No phones, no work, no distractions. I found a rustic little cabin on Airbnb that looked perfect. It had that log cabin feel, a stone fireplace, big windows that overlooked the forest, and best of all, no cell service. I remember thinking, finally, silence. We arrived just before sunset. The gravel driveway crunched under the tires, and the air smelled like pine and damp earth. The place looked just like the photos, maybe even better. But the second I stepped inside, I felt off. Nothing obvious, just something. The cabin had charm, definitely. It was warm, with a fire already prepped in the hearth, a cozy kitchen, and a wooden deck with a hot tub facing the woods. But as I walked the narrow hallway toward the bedroom, I noticed a door. A plain wooden door with a rusted black deadbolt. It didn't match the others, and it wasn't mentioned in the listing. I called out to Jake, who was still unloading the car. "Hey, did you see this locked door?" He shrugged. "Probably just storage, or the owner's closet." Still, something about it made my skin itch. I messaged the host just to be sure. Their reply was casual, almost too casual. "Yeah, just storage. Nothing interesting in there." Fine, I let it go, tried to. That evening we had dinner by the fire. A glass of wine turned into two. We sat in the hot tub, staring out into the pitch-black woods, listening to the wind through the trees. No traffic, no notifications, just nature. It should have been perfect. But later that night, as Jake fell asleep beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. And that's when I heard it. A soft creaking. Not from the deck, from inside the cabin. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. Another creak, like the floorboards just outside our door. I nudged Jake, whispered, "Did you hear that?" He mumbled something and rolled over. I got up quietly. The hallway was dark, except for a faint light coming from the kitchen. I walked slowly, barefoot, the floor cold beneath me. Everything looked normal, except that the air near the locked door felt different. It was colder. Still. Like walking into a room that hadn't been opened in years. I stopped in front of the door and leaned in, and I swear on everything, I heard breathing. Shallow, slow, on the other side. I backed away quickly, my pulse racing. I turned on every light in the house, checked all the doors and windows. Nothing was out of place. Jake thought I was just spooked by the silence. "It's an old cabin," he said. "They creak." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild. The next morning the door was open, not wide, just a crack, but enough. We hadn't touched it. Jake swore he hadn't either. I stood there staring at it, heart in my throat. The air coming out of that room was stale, musty, like rot and damp wood. I pushed the door open slowly with my foot. Inside was a small, windowless room. The walls were unpainted wood, and there was a mattress on the floor, thin, stained. A plastic plate sat beside it, crusted with food. In the corner, a baby monitor, the kind with a camera and a small screen. I picked it up. The battery was dead, but it had been used recently. There were candy wrappers, a pair of worn socks, and a coffee cup with a faint lipstick mark. Someone had been living in that room, watching us, watching other people before us. Jake's face went pale. Neither of us said a word. We packed as fast as we could, clothes thrown into bags, toothbrushes forgotten in the sink. Within 10 minutes, we were in the car, speeding down the mountain road. We drove until we found a diner with Wi-Fi. I pulled up the Airbnb listing again. One of the reviews was missing, but I found a cached version in Google's history. A woman had written something vague but unsettling. Weird noises at night. Felt watched. Locked door gave me the creeps. No one had replied. No one had believed her. I reported everything to Airbnb. A few days later, they emailed me. The listing had been taken down, and they were launching a formal investigation. A week later, I got another message from a local news outlet. The host had been arrested. Turns out he hadn't been renting the cabin legally. He'd been squatting in the storage space, recording guests through hidden cameras placed in the vents and corners. He had hours of footage, dozens of guests, some who never even knew they were being watched. And that locked room? It wasn't just storage. It had been his home, his hiding place. I still think about what would have happened if I hadn't noticed, if that door hadn't creaked open, if we'd stayed another night. Now, whenever we travel, I check every door, every mirror, every vent. I read every review. Because sometimes the thing that's watching you isn't in the woods. It's already inside the house. I'd been traveling solo for almost a year. Just me, my laptop, and the road. Working remotely gave me freedom. Too much of it, maybe. I started drifting from place to place, small towns, sleepy suburbs, wherever the Wi-Fi was decent and the rent was cheap. That's how I ended up in a quiet little town I'd never heard of. Population maybe a couple thousand. The kind of place with only one grocery store and a diner that closes at 6. I booked a shared house through Airbnb for the week. The listing said I'd have the entire upstairs to myself. The host wouldn't be on site. He lived in another state. There was supposedly a quiet long-term tenant living in the basement. I figured that was fine. I didn't plan on interacting with anyone. I just needed a place to sleep and work. I arrived around 10 p.m. The house sat on the edge of town, tucked between thick woods and a field. It looked older than the photos suggested. Peeling paint, overgrown lawn, a porch swing hanging off one chain. I let myself in with the keypad. The place smelled like old books and wood polish. You know that scent, like a closed library on a rainy day. It wasn't unpleasant, just nostalgic and quiet. So quiet it made my ears ring. Inside it was dimly lit and cold. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, and there was a distinct slant to the floorboards when I walked. But everything looked clean. Lived in, but clean. I unpacked a little, made myself some tea, and got ready for bed. As I curled up under the blankets, I told myself I'd finally found a peaceful place to reset. But that peace didn't last. That first night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound. Not a crash, not a bang, just footsteps. Slow, measured, directly beneath my bed. It wasn't creaking wood from the house settling. It was footsteps. I counted them, 4 steps, then a pause. Then 2 more. Then silence. I sat up, heart pounding. I reminded myself, someone lives down there. It's fine. Maybe they work nights. Maybe they're just a night owl. But something felt off. The steps didn't sound casual. They sounded careful, like someone trying not to be heard. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. I had coffee, answered some emails, told myself I was being dramatic. But on the 3rd day, I started noticing things. Tiny things. A coffee mug in the sink I hadn't used. My phone charging cable moved slightly from where I always leave it. My toothbrush was damp when I hadn't brushed yet. And once, I was sure the hallway light was on when I'd turned it off. I started locking my bedroom door at night. On the 4th evening, I heard it again. Footsteps, slower this time, followed by what sounded like a low hum, almost like someone humming a lullaby beneath their breath. I pressed my ear to the floor. I could feel a faint vibration. Someone was down there. I messaged the host. Hey, just checking. Your listing says there's a long-term tenant in the basement. Everything okay? No response. I waited an hour, two, nothing. At that point, I wasn't even scared. I was uneasy. There's a difference. Fear hits all at once. Unease builds in layers. And by then, I was buried in it. I looked up the non-emergency police line and called, feeling stupid even as I dialed. I just wanted them to check that someone was really supposed to be there. About an hour later, a local officer showed up. He was older, with a thick accent and the kind of face that looked like it had seen everything. He walked through the house with me. I showed him the listing. He looked at it, then looked at me and asked, "You said someone lives in the basement?" I nodded. That's what the host said, quiet long-term tenant. He went still, then he said something I'll never forget. "There's no one legally living here. The owner of this house died 6 months ago. Heart attack. This place was supposed to be boarded up." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. We stood in the kitchen in silence for a moment, then walked to the basement door. It looked like any other door, white paint, a brass handle, but it felt wrong. Too cold, too still. The officer opened it. Darkness spilled out. He pulled out his flashlight and started down the stairs. I stayed at the top, my breath frozen in my chest. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor, wooden beams, cobwebs everywhere. But it wasn't empty. There were empty food containers, fast food wrappers, soda cans, a stained mattress on the floor, a backpack with a few clothes, a small battery-operated lamp. But no person, no sign of anyone currently there. The officer called it in, said they'd keep an eye on the place, but there was nothing they could do. No law broken, technically. Just a squatter, maybe. Someone passing through. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind. I kept imagining someone just beneath me, listening, waiting. By sunrise, I had packed every single thing I owned into my car and was halfway out of town before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. I contacted Airbnb support, told them everything, sent photos of the basement, explained the police visit. They were polite, apologetic, said they'd look into it. A week later, the listing was gone, not deactivated, gone, no trace, no explanation. Sometimes I check again, just to be sure, still gone. But I still think about that house. I still wonder if someone is down there now, hiding, listening. And I've never stayed in a shared home again, not after that. It happened in the middle of summer, but I remember feeling cold. I'd rented a quiet lakeside cabin for 3 nights. I wanted a break from everything. City noise, constant notifications, the feeling of always being on. I needed space to think, write, and be alone. The cabin sat near the edge of a small lake. No neighbors, just forest on 3 sides, and water on the 4th. It had 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a fireplace, and huge windows that looked out over the water. The kind of place that felt peaceful the moment you arrived. The host had left the keys under a flower pot. There was a handwritten note on the table welcoming me, and a list of things to know about the property, where the firewood was, how to light the stove, where the nearest grocery store was. But something on the list caught my eye. In all caps, near the bottom it said, "Please do not open the small window in the bedroom." No explanation, no context, just that. I assumed it was sealed shut or broken. Maybe bugs got in. I didn't think much of it until the second night. The first night was uneventful. I lit a fire, made some tea, and sat on the deck watching the sun sink into the lake. That silence was something I hadn't heard in years. No cars, no sirens, just cicadas and the lapping of the water. But the second night, something shifted. I'd left the bedroom window closed. I was sure of it. But at 3:17 a.m., I remember because I checked the clock. I woke up freezing. The air in the room had gone icy. My skin prickled. I reached for the blanket but paused. The window, that small window above the bed, it was open. Just a crack, but enough for the air to feel different. Wrong. I got up and closed it, shivering. Locked it too. My mind immediately went to the note. Why did the host say not to open it? I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I texted the host. Hey, just wondering, what's the deal with the small window? It was open when I woke up. No reply. I sent another an hour later. Still nothing. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I had opened it by accident. Maybe I'd forgotten. But all day I kept looking at that window. It was too small for anyone to crawl through, but something about it felt watched, like something on the other side was waiting. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed up reading in bed until after 2 a.m., every light on. Eventually I drifted off. I woke up to tapping, light, precise, like fingernails on glass. I froze. The tapping came again, this time from inside the room. The window was open, wide open, and it was dark outside, not moonlight dark, black, like the woods had swallowed the stars. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the window, heart thudding like a drum. I could feel something near it. Not see, feel. The kind of weight in the air you get when someone's standing too close behind you. But there was no sound, no breathing, no silhouette. Then just as suddenly the air shifted. Whatever was there, wasn't. I leapt up, slammed the window shut, locked it, and shoved the dresser in front of it. I didn't sleep at all that night. At sunrise, I went outside to look at the window from the outside. The thing is, that window had no ledge, no step, no stairs. It was nearly 8 feet off the ground. There were no footprints, no disturbed grass, no smudges, nothing, just glass. I packed everything into my car and drove straight into town. I never got a response from the host. I reported the listing to Airbnb, flagged it for safety issues. A few days later, the entire listing was gone, wiped clean, like it had never existed. I've checked that area on Airbnb since. There's nothing listed even close to that cabin. And here's the part I haven't told anyone. A week later, back at home, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name, handwritten. Inside was a single sheet of paper. In neat block letters, it said, "You opened it." That's all. I moved apartments within the month, and I haven't stayed alone anywhere since.